Wavesound Audiobooks presents The Knighton Women's Compendium by Denise Picton, narrated by Maddy Withington. Prologue. Dorothy Knighton slowly ran her hands over the old book that sat before her on the oak farm table. It was a wonder that the faded grey cover was still intact, given the hundreds and perhaps even thousands of times it had been opened and closed, first by her mother, and now by her. It was just past midnight. She was safe writing at this hour because the household was asleep by 10:30, and her daughter wouldn't get up for the first of her inevitable visits to the bathroom for another 2 hours. You could set the clock by Flora's bladder. Rather than use the strong light over the table to write, which would alert the curious in the household, Dorothy had brought a small lamp from beside her bed and stretched the cord from the power point near the sink to her spot at the end of the table. It was cold in the kitchen, but she'd lived with the winter temperatures in the Clare Valley her entire life, and so all it took to be ready to write was the rubbing together of her long, thin hands to encourage better circulation, and the addition of her fingerless gloves, knitted by her granddaughter Lucy. Knitting seemed to be the only thing Lucy had energy for these days. Dorothy picked up her pen and opened the cover of a notebook on which she'd written The Knighton Women's Compendium. She pondered what she could write that might be of value to the women in her household, who were all at such different stages in their lives. She looked around the room and her eyes settled on her mother's scales, the 6 original weights still sitting on top of each other. The worn copper tray managed a faint gleam in the dull light. Next to it was the brand new set Flora had given her for her birthday. Her daughter Flora was sure anything new was better than everything old, but Dorothy knew she'd never use the new scales. She liked to begin each writing session with a quote from the beloved grey reference book, her mother's 1905 Women's Annual. Dorothy knew her mother's book provided still helpful advice on keeping bees and managing house linens. But in every other way, the world had changed. And so she was writing the compendium as a companion to the original reference book. How should the 4 generations of women who made up her household continue to live their lives together? They needed the technical advice from her old grey book, but they also needed messages from her heart. Tonight, her mother's old scales provided her with the inspiration she needed. She'd ask her darling great-granddaughter Holly to consider the relative investment she was making between loving what she had and wishing for what she didn't, so that the scales that weighed the value of her life were in better balance. This seemed particularly important at the moment, given the upcoming dance marathon, about which Dorothy still harboured considerable misgivings. Perhaps she would even add her advice about how to dance.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?